Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt Leader within. Hey, this week I want to go back to a story I told probably 3 to 4 years ago on a podcast installment. And I want to go back and revisit that story again because it's apropos to the lesson I want to teach today. I want to talk about learning from mistakes, or if we don't learn from the mistakes, the opportunity to get to repeat and make those mistakes all over again. This episode is about getting smarter or starting over. Now, for those of you that know my family, my dad was a bivocational pastor a lot of his life. So every Sunday, every Wednesday night for 6.5 years, my parents drove from Fort Smith, Arkansas to the little town of Heavener, Oklahoma. It was about 50 miles each way, so 100 miles round trip every Sunday, every Wednesday night for 6.5 years. Dad was invited to come in, and there was a group of individuals that wanted to start a church. So my dad, for almost 7 years, led this fledgling congregation as they started out as a small number and grew and ultimately ended up building an incredible building. And Dad really got the church established and had an opportunity for them to really take a foothold right there in Heavener, Oklahoma. Now, on Sundays, when we would travel over, rather than driving all the way back to Fort Smith after church and then coming back again on Sunday night, we would stay with one of the local families, and that avoided, again, that back and forth trip, wear and tear on the bodies as well as wear and tear on Dad's old Rambler that he drove for many, many years. Now, one of the families that we spent a lot of time with and staying with had a huge garden behind their home. They also had chickens. And so my sister and I got an opportunity to learn a little bit about gardening. We got to learn how to pick tomatoes and how to pick okra and how to, do corn and the other things that you learn to do working in a garden. We also got to work with chickens and collect eggs and all those fun things that as kids kind of sound like fun. And he ended up doing some work, but hey, it was something unique to do. But Dad and Uncle Charlie, as we called him, they had a very special relationship and a bond that really came together over time. Dad was fascinated by farming and had lots of questions. Charlie, who was a farmer, was full of answers. And not only would he give Dad answers to the questions he asked about particular plants and how to plant them and where to plant them and what type of fertilizer went in the garden and the things that a budding gardener of sorts would want to ask. Uncle Charlie always provided my dad with an opportunity not just to learn, but to actually get out in the garden and do. Now, fast forward a few years later, and Dad had stepped down from his pastoral role. We had relocated from Fort Smith and moved to Russellville, Arkansas, and Dad began this incredible career selling furniture. Now, I was attending college, and Dad decided that he was going to make Uncle Charlie proud and got this brilliant idea that Dad was going to dig up our backyard and plant a garden. So he went out into the backyard and carved a section out, probably about a fourth of our backyard, and bought a tiller. And the next thing you know, my dad's out there tearing up the backyard, getting ready to plant a garden. Now, Mom and I laughed initially, as did my sister, but as we watched my dad engage in this process, he became very intense. And we knew at that point, this was not going to be a hobby. This was going to be something Dad really put himself into. Now, Dad's initial foray into gardening was pretty simple. It was strawberries, it was carrots, it was tomatoes, it was corn, and I believe there was some okra and maybe some peas mixed into all that. But every night after work, Dad would wander out into the backyard and very meticulously he would weed, he would water, he would nurture this garden and really giving those plants the attention they needed to have the opportunity to grow. He was constantly going to the co-op, constantly asking questions, constantly looking things up and reading and understanding this world of gardening so he could get better doing what it was that he loved to do. And after a few weeks of patient persistence, Dad started to collect the fruit of his labor. We started to enjoy strawberries and carrots and tomatoes and sweet corn and okra and peas on the kitchen table. That turned out to be pretty good. Now, fast forward again to the spring semester of my sophomore year. Dad had been gardening for a while, and I came home from school early because afternoon classes had been canceled. So I was enjoying some lunch, and as I was finishing up my lunch, I looked into the backyard and recalled a conversation I'd had with my dad over the prior weekend about the fact that he needed to find some time in the next week to go till the garden and get it ready for planting. So I got this brilliant idea. I was going to surprise my dad, and I was going to till the garden before he got home. So I went into the backyard, pulled the heavy tiller from the shed, started it up, stuck the tines in the ground, and I started tilling. Now, back and forth, I went in this plot of land that Dad had, mapped out as his garden, and I began to break up that dark, rich soil. three, four, five, maybe six times I passed over this area again and again and again, breaking up that dirt so that it was just fine to the touch. And when you put it in your hands and squeezed, it came out in very light texture, exactly what you would want to prepare the soil for planting. You could literally smell the freshness and the richness of the soil as I dug it up. And I knew my dad was going to be surprised when he got home. Well, a few hours later, Dad pulled in the driveway. Couldn't wait to show him what I'd done. And as soon as he walked in the door, I said, Dad, I've got to show you something. Come with me out back. So I took Dad out the back door to show him my handiwork. And as we walked out and Dad looked out into the backyard, to my really surprise, Dad wasn't excited as I thought he would be or should be. I'm telling Dad about all this great work I've done to prepare the garden for him and how proud he should be of me. And Dad is kind of shaking his head going, the strawberries, the strawberries, the strawberries. Well, what I didn't know was this. In Arkansas, the best time to plant strawberries is in the fall of the year before the spring you want to have the harvest. So Dad had planted strawberries in late September, early October, and this would give the root system time to firmly establish before winter set in. That way, when spring rolled around, the fruit that was there in the root system fully established gave those strawberry plants the best opportunity to create a full harvest for the spring. So in my zeal, in my excitement to do something fun and helpful for my dad, I had destroyed all the hard work that Dad put into preparing those strawberries for a spring harvest. Yes, I made a mistake. I blew it. I messed up. Now, I could try to deny it, but that was kind of hard to do because I had just spent 5 minutes bragging on how well I had done tilling the backyard. Or I could do what I knew I had to do, and I had to admit it. I had to own it. I had to ask for forgiveness, but more importantly, I had to learn from it. And that's the funny thing about mistakes. We either learn from our mistakes or we get to repeat them. So what did I do? I owned it. I had to. But better yet, I learned from it. Now, Dad was really gracious in that moment, and while he continued to bring up the strawberries that he didn't get to enjoy for the remainder of the year, I will say that I had prepared that garden so well that when Dad planted seed and the harvest came, it was one of the best harvests ever that came out of that garden, or at least that's what I told myself. Now, again, Dad didn't make sure I forgot about my mistake all year long. And every time we would sit down for some shortcake, he would, man, I sure wish I had some strawberries. And he'd look at me and smile. But guess what? I didn't repeat that mistake in the future. I learned my lesson. It was either get smarter or start over. Now, in April 2017, I traveled to Orlando, Florida with my daughter Jessie, and we went there to attend an international Maxwell conference. And it was at that event that my daughter Jessie got to meet Dr. John C. Maxwell for the first time. Now, one of the lessons John taught while we were there was on the subject of failure. And Dr. John really brought it home when he said this. He said, you're going to make some mistakes in life. You're going to experience some failure, and it's okay. This is how we learn. My advice to you is to fail early, fail often, but make sure you're failing forward. Now, think about what he just said. Here I take my daughter to hear Dr. John Maxwell, the foremost authority on leadership in the world. And what's he telling Jessie to do? Fail more often, make more mistakes. That was his leadership advice to my daughter and everybody else in the room. Now, me having been a fan and having read a number of Dr. John's books, what I wanted was everything rises and falls on leadership. Or, the other famous phrase of Dr. John, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. But what she and everybody else in the room got instead was fail early, fail often, but make sure you fail forward. Well, it turns out in retrospect, that's pretty good advice. Why? Because in life, you and I, we're all going to make mistakes. There's going to be times we try to succeed, but we fall short and we fail. And when that happens, when we don't get a win, we've got one of two available options. And there's only two. We can either learn from our mistakes and get better, or we can fail to learn from those mistakes and repeat those same mistakes in the future. So at the end of the day, it's plan A or it's plan B. There is no plan C. Now, Dr. John says it well, and he actually wrote a book along this title, Sometimes We Win, Sometimes We Learn. I think the title would be better said, Sometimes We Win, but every time we learn. At least that's what we should be doing. And if you think about what Dr. John said in that moment, fail early, fail often, but fail forward. Well, guess what? We've been failing early, failing often, and failing forward since the time we were born. You don't believe me? Think about it. Not a single one of us listening to this podcast, you, me, anybody else around the world that's listening to this podcast today, not a single one of us has ever been successful, at least at first, at everything we had to do to learn as we were growing from infancy to adulthood. Think about that. How many times did you try to stand up and you failed before you could actually stand up? How many times were you able to attempt to sit up before you could sit up without falling over? How many times did it take you to pick those Cheerios up off of the high chair that you were in and actually get the Cheerio into your mouth? Those are things that took time to learn. And what's interesting is it was learning that taught us what not to do, so we eventually figured out what to do. And once we learned what to do, we began to practice that until we got pretty good at it. And it was through this process of learning that we learned to do a lot of things as we moved from infanthood to adulthood. We learned to crawl. We learned to sit. We learned to talk. We learned to stand. We learned to walk. We learned to run. We learned to eat. We learned to sing. We learned to dance. We learned to feed ourselves, to dress ourselves, to ride a bike, to climb a tree, to write our name in pencil or in cursive or, whatever we did to learn to write. We colored inside the lines and many, many more things we learned. But it was through learning what not to do that we eventually figured out what to do. So learning became a valuable byproduct of the failures we made along the way. As we learned, we got smarter and we got better. If we didn't learn the lesson, then we got to repeat it again until we figured it out. Now, this process of learning through failure is often referred to as learned industriousness. Now, this theory that was espoused by Robert Eisenberger came out a few years ago, and he said this. He says, when we make the effort, even when we fail, the fact that we made the effort becomes a reward in itself. It makes the hard work of trying feel rewarding. And it's that opportunity to feel the reward of trying hard, even if we didn't fully succeed, that inspires us to continue. Now, what does this do? This helps us look beyond the failure and to appreciate the effort and to acknowledge that the lesson we learned is going to give us the opportunity to try again, but this time learning a little more than what we knew before. And we keep going back, we keep trying again and again and again until we succeed. And then once we succeed, we do it again, but this time to try to do it just a little bit better. So making the effort literally became its own reward. Now, Henry Ford understood this. The founder of the Ford Motor Company, he challenged his engineers in the 1930s to cast an 8-cylinder engine out of a single one-piece block of metal. That, up until that point in time, had never been done. Time and time again, no matter what the engineers tried to do, they failed. So they finally went to Mr. Ford and said, this can't be done. And I love his response to them. To me, it was priceless. When they said, Mr. Ford, it can't be done. Henry Ford turned and he looked his engineer squarely in the eye and he said, produce it anyway. Well, after a year of learning from failure, the engineers finally succeeded. And today, the ability to cast a 4, 6, or 8-cylinder engine in a single block has really become the mainstay of the automotive world that you and I enjoy today, no matter what type of vehicle we drive. Now, interestingly enough, when Ford later retold the story, as he did many, many times, he added this at the end of that. He said, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, but this time more intelligently. Now, Thomas Edison also understood this learned industriousness power because he was a prolific inventor. But because he was a prolific inventor, guess what? He failed his way to success hundreds of times over his illustrious career. If you've listened to me for any period of time, you know I've talked about the fact that he had 10,000 failures before he finally created the incandescent light bulb. And when he was asked by reporters about the secret to his success, here's what he said. He said, our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always trying just one more time. Did you get that? Our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The greatest way to succeed is to try just one more time. Learned industriousness, putting forth the effort, getting the reward of the effort, learning something we can apply so our next effort is a little bit better. And we move our way from failure to success one effort at a time. Now, what I love about this concept is when we begin to see the value in the effort of at least trying to do something we've never done before, when we see that as a learning opportunity, we realize one of two things. We're either going to succeed or we're going to learn something that's going to move us closer so maybe we can succeed next time. Every learning opportunity moves us closer to success. And making the effort becomes its own reward because it pushes us ever closer to achieving that win. Now, from the time we're born, you and I, we all go through a very unique, distinct six-part learning process. It's what I call the cycle of learning. It's comprised of 6 stages or 6 phases, however, whatever word you want to use there. And in this 6-step process, it's the process that allows us to acquire new skills, new talents, and new abilities. And we can do so all throughout our lives. We start that out as very young infants and we begin to develop skills and talents and abilities. But even as we get older, even though we may be in our 40s or 50s or 60s or even older, we can still apply this same learning process to learn new skills, new talents, and new abilities. The only time we can't learn is when we're no longer here. We have the opportunity to learn and grow as long as we're alive. But it also reminds us in the 6-part learning process that true growth only happens when we push ourselves outside that status quo comfort zone world that we want to live in, and we voluntarily step into that uncomfortable, unfamiliar place where learning and growth happens. So this 6-step process, this framework I want to talk about, reveals to us something very powerful. And I want you to get this before I introduce the 6 steps to you. This framework I'm going to present is going to show you, it's going to reveal to you that frustration and mistakes aren't signs of failure. They're indications that you're learning, you're growing, and you're having the opportunity to become a better version of who you are and what you do. So what are the 6 phases, the 6 stages of learning? Well, the first stage is knowledge. And this is where you're introduced to new information or new concepts or new skills. I mean, think about it. You're sitting in your high chair as an infant and you look across the kitchen table and you see mom and dad pick up a fork, a knife, and a spoon. And they begin to use those instruments to feed themselves. And you're still struggling to pick up Cheerios with your fingers. Now, all of a sudden, you've been introduced to new information. A new concept of how you feed yourself has been revealed to you, and you now realize there is a skill set that you are lacking. Now, at this point in the process, you understand what needs to be learned, but as an infant, you've got very little or no experience in how to apply that. You don't know how to use a fork or a knife or a spoon, and chances are mom and dad started with a spoon because they didn't want you to stab yourself with a fork or cut yourself with a knife. So you probably started with a spoon and probably a rubber-covered baby spoon, but that's okay. We got to start somewhere. Let's start with the basics. But what's interesting here is this. In this knowledge process, until you know what you don't know what you don't know. You didn't know sitting in that high chair that it was possible to eat from a fork, a knife, or a spoon until you saw mom and dad do it. You didn't know it was possible to drive a vehicle until you saw mom and dad do it. You didn't know it was possible to ride a bike until you saw an older sibling or someone in your neighborhood riding a bicycle. Those things became new information, new concepts, and revealed skills that we had yet to learn. This is the driver of curiosity, and curiosity is really critical here because curiosity drives our desire to know. And when we begin to get exposure to new information, new concepts, and skills we have yet to learn, that begins to move us to stage 2. Now, stage 2 in the process is practice. This is where you begin to rudimentally apply the knowledge that you've now acquired. I mean, think about it. You're just now getting good at picking up a Cheerio with your fingers and putting it in your mouth. And now mom wants to give you a spoon and try to help you learn how to scoop baby food out of a jar or off of a plate, or in some other way begin to learn to use this instrument to be able to learn a new skill. So this process of learning all throughout our lives as we practice is marked by one thing. And that's an intentional effort on our part to perform a task or a skill. Now, remember, at this point, it's rudimentary. It's not yet natural. So we're having to spend a lot of physical and mental energy because we're consciously focusing on performing something we don't yet really know how to do. And it's in this phase of learning that we're building the foundation upon which our future success is going to be erected. Now, this is the opportunity for us to cultivate the ability to recognize and to value and to assimilate and to apply the things that we're learning. And this practice area, this stage 2, moves us immediately into stage 3, and that's discomfort. Now, this is the critical learning zone. This is getting out of status quo, doing things the way we've always done it, and moving into an area that we're learning something new, or we're learning how to do something we already know how to do in a different or better way. And it's in this critical learning zone where the task or the skill still feels difficult. It still feels awkward. It still feels frustrating because we haven't yet built the muscle memory to be able to do that. Now, whatever it is that we're learning, it kind of feels like we're reaching, but we just can't quite grasp it. It feels like it's just beyond our current capability, and that's okay. Because at that point, we've moved into that uncomfortable place where growth has the opportunity to happen. And at that point, we're learning how to apply what we've observed in the knowledge phase. And now in this practice phase, we're moving into this comfort area where we're really beginning to grow and learn and suddenly become a better version of who we are and what we do as we learn to do new things. Now, it's also in this third stage that we begin to experience frustration and failure. Two of our friends that are going to follow us around much of our life. Now, the mistakes that we make at this point are okay because the more mistakes we make in this critical zone, this area that we're dealing with that is the learning zone, the more mistakes we make and the faster we make them, the faster the improvements that we're going to make along the way. That's why Dr. John says fail early, fail often, and fail forward. So again, the more mistakes we learn from, the faster the improvements we're going to make in stage 3 of the process. I like to call this the messy middle of learning because it's in this phase we've got to learn to tolerate frustration. We're getting there. We've got the basics down, but we haven't quite yet mastered the task. Maybe I can take the bicycle and go half a block before I fall over. Or maybe I'm still on training wheels and I can go for a little bit, but then I turn the handlebars too far and I tip and fall over. Again, frustrations. And it's in that point that we can give up and quit. But if we keep going, we get a chance to move to stage 4. Now, let me say one other thing about stage 3. Many of us believe that learning should be fast, it should be easy, and it should be comfortable. But I'm here to tell you this. Acquiring any real skill, any real talent, any real ability, it takes time and it takes persistent progress. And that's about being persistent in getting it right. And all along the way, it's going to be messy. Now, the fourth stage is more practice. Now, we've had learning where we got the knowledge part, and then we went to practice, and then we went to discomfort. Now we're in stage 4, which is the repetition zone. This is where we're going to continually practice what it is we're learning, trying to improve and get better at it every single time. This is where in martial arts we talk about honing your skill so that you go from being a novice to an advanced student and ultimately to a master that has taken this craft as far as you can take it. Now, it's during this phase that as we're honing our skills, we're going to be getting ongoing feedback that's going to let us continually tweak what we're learning to do. So every time we do it a little bit better. We're still learning from our mistakes, but the mistakes we're making are fewer, and the tweaks and the adjustments we're having to make are smaller. But now we're fine-tuning our results to move beyond the basics, to becoming advanced, and ultimately to mastering that skill, that talent, or their ability. Now, I will say that this stage of learning, this repetition zone phase of the learning process, it demands a higher level of intensity because, again, we're moving from just the rudimentary basics into the mastery of that skill in our lives. And as long as we're learning from mistakes, guess what? Now we get to move to the final level of learning. But let me say one more thing before we get to stage 5. Simply repeating a skill isn't enough. Effective practice requires that we push beyond the comfort zone and that we are okay with not being okay. It's not practice that makes perfect. Practice makes permanent what we're practicing. It is perfect practice that makes for a perfect performance. And that only comes as we continually refine what we're learning until we hone it to the razor's edge. It's through constant, continual, never ending improvement that you and I have a chance to go from beginner to advanced to master. Now, the fifth stage of learning is progress. And this is where this purposeful repetition that we did in stage 4 begins to result in masterful improvement. It's in this phase of the learning process that we truly begin to master parts of the skill. We're building the muscle memory. Our brain is hardwiring this into our psyche, so it is now becoming habitual. We're not having to think as much about what we're doing because we've developed the muscle memory around this skill or this talent or this ability. So it's not as taxing physically or mentally as it once was. And all of a sudden, we're feeling more confident that I've got this. Why? Because we're beginning to internalize the skill. Now, the sixth and final stage of learning is what we call the comfort zone. We've now moved back into a comfort zone because at this point, we've mastered that skill to a point that it's referred to in the human behavior world as unconscious competence. We don't have to think because we've created a neural pathway in our brain so we can perform that skill, that talent, or that ability without having to give it a lot of conscious thought. Now, in the world of martial arts, we've referred to this as mushin, which literally means no mind. If I'm out on the street and somebody's throwing a punch and they're going to hit me in the face, if I don't do something, I don't have time to stop and ask, what would a black belt do? Because if I have to stop and ask the question, I'm going to get hit and I'm going to get my nose broke, my eye blacked, or my teeth knocked out. I don't want that to happen. So it's going through this learning process that if I see someone throwing a punch, I'm either going to move, I'm going to redirect, I'm going to block, I'm going to strike. I'm going to do something without thinking because I've programmed that into how I live my life and I do it every day. Now, you don't believe this is true? I want you to think about your life on a daily basis. We spend anywhere from 85 to 90% of our day on autopilot. I mean, think about it. You go through the same routine every day. Do you give a lot of thought to brushing your teeth, to pouring a cup of coffee, to driving to work, to putting your clothes on, to taking a shower, to walking the dog, to doing the things that we routinely do every single day? No. Why? Because those things have become habitual. And when they become habitual, we are now in a stage of unconscious competence that we don't really think about it. Our mind has internalized that skill, and you and I can perform that task without conscious thought. Now, interestingly enough, when we get to stage 6, the cycle has the opportunity to begin again. Because once we've internalized a skill and we've mastered it, we now move into our comfort zone. And where does learning take place? Learning takes place when we get out of the comfort zone and move back into that uncomfortable place where growth happens. So for us to continue to learn and grow, we've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So again, once we've mastered a skill, we've internalized it, now we get to re-enter the knowledge zone, stage 1, and we get to repeat the process of learning so we can master something new. Or we've got the opportunity to deepen our learning of something we've already learned and we've already internalized so we can take that mastery to an even deeper, more meaningful level. So let's go back to where we started the lesson and let's revisit failure. Do you remember what Dr. John told my daughter Jessie and the audience in Orlando, Florida that day? He said, you're going to make some mistakes in life. You're going to experience failure. It's okay. This is how we learn. My advice to you is to fail early, fail often, but make sure you fail forward. You know, Henry Ford said what? Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. What did Thomas Edison say? The greatest opportunity for us to experience success is to try just one more time. He said most people quit too early, and that's the greatest mistake we make. The opportunity to succeed is trying just one more time. So, what did these men understand about failure that you and I need to learn? Well, I think the lesson is pretty simple, and we touched on it earlier, but I want to mention it again. There are only two possible outcomes to any effort that you and I attempt at any point in our life. We're either going to succeed or we're going to fail. Now, both success and failure can teach us a valuable lesson, but that's provided that you and I are open and we're willing to learn. So, what I've learned from failure is this: failure can be a very powerful teacher. Failure can foster resilience. It can foster self awareness. It can foster innovation in our lives by highlighting exactly what or where that you and I need to improve. It can reveal to us what we need to learn, or maybe what we need to unlearn to actually learn and grow and to become a better version of who we are and what we do. So if we use failure as a learning opportunity and we see failure as a tutor, the lessons that it wants to teach us are going to strengthen the neural pathways in our mind so that we avoid repeating the same mistake in the future or similar mistakes just like it. It's going to make us better at who we are and what we do. And failure, if used as a tutor, can fuel creativity, it can foster curiosity, it can inspire innovation, and it can ultimately serve to give us the necessary steps that you and I need to take as we walk the journey towards success. And again, it reminds me that funny thing about failure. We can either learn from it or we can repeat it. We can either get smarter or we can get to start over. And the important thing in that is you and I, we get to choose every single day what we're going to learn or choose not to learn. So let me leave you with 4 quick lessons from failure as we get ready to wrap up this week's teaching. Number 1, failure can provide valuable self-reflection. Because when we pause to reflect on our day and we examine the successes we've experienced as well as the failures we've experienced, there are lessons to be learned. And when we go through that reflective moment, it gives us an opportunity to reevaluate every decision, every choice that you and I made. And as we go through that process, many, many times, the root cause of what caused the mistake is going to show up. Again, this is how we learn. It's through what I call this triple insight process of self-reflection and reevaluation that we learn, that we unlearn, and that we explore what we can do differently to experience a better outcome next time. Now, the second thing that we learn from failure is the fact that it's going to strengthen our resilience and our mental resolve. Because as we build mental toughness by learning to keep going, by being rewarded by the effort and giving us the opportunity to try again, this time a little smarter, we're also going to be developing our emotional intelligence along the way. And as we do those things, guess what? Those things, mental toughness and emotional intelligence, are going to help us pivot and innovate and persevere rather than simply giving up or quitting when the going gets tough or we don't experience a win. You know, one of my favorite lessons from failure is using it as a growth accelerator. It's when I get the opportunity to shift my perspective from saying, I can't do that, to shifting and saying, I can't do that yet. Did you get the difference? I can't do that is a declarative statement. And what did Henry Ford say? Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. When you say, I can't do that, the mind believes that to be true and will argue anything to the contrary. When we shift perspective to, I can't do that yet, we've positioned our mind to say, I can't do that yet, but I'm still open to learn what I need to learn so I can do that later. So this is where learned industriousness comes in. It's rewarding the effort and helping us see the lessons we need to learn so we can try again and again and again. And if we lean into that and we continue to try, learning from the failures that life brings our way, guess what? We're going to learn, we're going to grow, and we're going to go from I can't do that to I can't do that yet to ultimately we're going to go to I can do that and I will. Now, the third thing failure does for us is it reveals what doesn't work. And I love that. Thomas Edison said he learned 10,000 ways not to make the incandescent light bulb before he got it right. Failure reveals what doesn't work. Let me say that the right way. Failure reveals what doesn't work. So, like Edison, we can explore other options. We can try alternatives. We can experiment and we can explore until we find what does work. And once we find what does work, then we can go back and take what works and continue going back through the learning process to make what works even more efficient and more effective. So what works now works better. So it's through this learning process of going through failure that we not only learn what not to do, but we begin to uncover better strategies that we might have otherwise overlooked or ignored altogether. Again, the incandescent light bulb we have today is a result of 10,000 failures that turned into learning opportunities because Edison saw failure as a tutor. Now, the last thing that I want to point out today when it comes to failure is failure teaches us to be humble and to be accountable. Going back to the story of my dad and me destroying his strawberry crop for the year, when it comes to mistakes, we can do one of two things. We can deny it or we can own it. Now, I had to do the choice. I had to make the choice. I had already admitted what I had done, so I couldn't deny it. I couldn't blame my sister or somebody else. I had to own it in that moment. And I'm glad I did because I learned a valuable lesson. But here's what I can tell you. When we admit our mistakes, we own them. And when we take responsibility for our actions and other people see us do that in a spirit of humility, it makes it easier for us to ask for help. And when they see that we own our failures and that we're learning from our failures and we're open and willing to learn and maybe we need some help along the way, when people see our humility in action and the fact that we own our failures, guess what? They're going to be much more willing to lend a hand to help us learn what we need to learn. And remember, when we make more mistakes, we make faster improvements in our lives. Don't forget that. When we make more mistakes, we make faster improvements in our lives. How does that play out? We get smarter, we gain courage, we learn to laugh at ourselves, and we learn to expand our comfort zone. So I want to leave you with the three quotes that I shared earlier, and let's wrap up today's teaching. John C. Maxwell said this: "You're going to make some mistakes in life. You're going to experience failure. It's okay. This is how we learn. My advice to you is to fail early, to fail often, but make sure you fail forward." Henry Ford said this: "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently." Thomas Edison said this: "Our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try just one more time." So one final thought, and we're going to wrap up today. There's a funny thing about failure. We can either learn from it and we can get smarter, or we can ignore it and we can repeat that lesson over and over again until we learn it. So for me, I've made failure a teacher and a friend, and I understand its mission is to make me better. I want to get better, and I'm okay with that. How about you? I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.